Happy to have you. And I'm going to get started with something I was happy to see, which was Logan Gilbert looking phenomenal. Jordan, on our show, I think a couple weeks ago, we asked you, hey, what's the one thing that, not named Cal Raleigh could catapult this team to the playoffs? And you felt like it would all hinge on not just the starting pitching, but maybe especially Logan Gilbert. Not just what did you make of his night, but what's your outlook for the Mariners pitching and once again, how impactful you think that could be for this team in the second half here?
Yeah, I mean, that's the Logan Gilbert that I think we've kind of grown accustomed to seeing over the last few years, but hadn't really seen much of in 2025. And as I kind of talked about over these last few weeks, like you got to give the guy a little bit of grace. I mean, it's not just that he was coming back from injury, it's that he's coming back from injury when he's never been injured. And so I think this was a very different experience for him to try and kind of get back to feeling like himself. And I think, last night was against, the hottest team in baseball. I know the Brewers, lineup is not necessarily as fearsome as you would expect for the team with their record, but it's still a really impressive team, and he just completely overwhelmed them. It was a really impressive performance.
Yeah, you mentioned the lineup not being impressive yet. They won 11 games in a row, got to 60 wins before any other team. Are the Mariners capable of such things, since we're looking at the Brewers and we're not overwhelmed with talent?
Yeah, no, and I think that gets to what I've kind of been saying about the Mariners, is that they've proven themselves as a team with a pretty high floor. And I think last night in some ways you saw the ceiling. I think we've kind of gotten used to their offense being a little bit more consistent than we've seen over these first couple games against Milwaukee. But Milwaukee, of course, can pitch it. But sometimes all it does take is a Cal Raleigh homer and a Logan Gilbert dominant performance. And, the bullpen was a little shakier towards the end, but got the job done. So, yeah, that's obviously a really impressive win. We'll see how they do in the series finale today. I think I will say that the one part about these first two games, and I kind of highlighted this a couple weeks ago, is how is this offense going to perform at home? This has still been an issue for them this season, even as the overall offensive numbers have ticked up. They still have struggled to score for the most part at home as much, and we've seen that over these first couple games. Faced some really good pitchers. We'll see how it continues today and, through the rest of this home slate for the rest of the season, but that's kind of what I'm watching closely for them moving forward.
Perhaps it's because of the bats available, or because it's the Mariners' needs happen to be both corner spots on the infield. But one of the debates I see is whether or not adding a first baseman or adding a third baseman would do more for this team. And you can kind of see the case either way, Jordan, where you look at Ben Williamson's glove and you go, oh my God, he's been such a boon for them, but still a rookie figuring it out at the plate. Likewise, you look at first base, and there was a moment where Solano was getting it done. There was a moment where Luke Raley came back and had that pop. Yesterday, he has an error, has kind of another moment, and obviously some of that pop has disappeared. How do you prioritize between first and third, where you personally think the Mariners could really stand to add?
I think third base still makes more sense. I think that for as totally understandably proud as the team is of Ben Williamson's contributions this season, I think going and getting a Suarez or another third baseman, especially in the short term, is not saying that Ben Williamson stinks and he's never going to play a role on this team. It's just an acknowledgement that this lineup still could use another big bat, and that is a position that would be easier to replace. And it would be no shame to send Ben Williamson back to AAA when he's barely played there. And I think what he's been able to do is really impressive. Now, you could argue that what he's getting defensively, that's fine, but if you still are going to get offense, then yeah, fitting in the first base DH is a little bit more delicate, but still doable. And I think that they should be creative in any way that they can add offense. I think that they should be doing that, and they shouldn't be limiting themselves. But I just think that third base is a much more natural fit, and it is not a referendum on Ben Williamson never having a future on this team or in the big leagues. It's just that offensively, if you want to upgrade right now, it is much easier to upgrade that spot offensively than it is first base, where even though it's been a little clunky defensively, I still do believe in Raley, and obviously Ken Zone's really been pretty impressive what he's been able to do in right. So Raley still fitting in there at first and at DH, I think is still ultimately a pretty solid option, whereas third base, you're just not getting a lot on offense right now.
Jordan, I know this is a Seattle sports show, and we focus on Seattle sports, but there was something I saw last night at Misiorowski, I believe I'm saying his name right. A slider at 95 miles per hour. What am I seeing here? How special is that young man?
Yeah, no, it's you got. I mean, I would say you get the full Miz experience, but you didn't because they pulled him in, the fourth inning. So it wasn't really, if you really were hoping to see him go toe to toe with Logan Gilbert the whole time, I'm sure the Mariners were happy to see him out of the game. But no, I mean, this is one of the more remarkable pitching breakouts that we've seen in some time. However, it's funny to coming from someone in Seattle. I'm not blaming you whatsoever, but what he did in the Futures game a couple years ago in Seattle was like kind of this. Now, maybe it wasn't quite as loud, maybe the slider wasn't quite as hard, but that was one of the louder Futures game performances that I've seen in 10 years covering that game, and it was a glimpse into what he was capable of. Now, at that point, the thought was, all right, well, he's never going to throw enough strikes to like be a consistent starting pitcher. His command has taken huge steps forward over the last 2 years to where now he is this just like star starter. So we'll see how they manage him. I think that decision to monitor his innings coming out of the break is a fascinating one. And certainly for his Brewers team that's trying to win the division, I think Misiorowski was already a huge story, but now every start we're going to kind of wonder how long they're going to let him go. And I think that's what makes him so fascinating.
Is there an interesting trend that you notice with young pitchers, and it could be one having gone on for a while? It's just, I think that I've got some recency bias, obviously having, we've seen Paul Skeens, the story that he's become, Miz, the story he's become, recency bias here in Seattle with them taking Cade Anderson at 3 overall. You just wonder like how young pitchers have evolved and developed. Jordan, there's obviously already a narrative heading into this season and certainly last that like, hey, pitchers are starting younger. Should we worry about the wear and tear that they're experiencing? What to you is one of the most interesting ways that position, especially those young guys, have kind of evolved?
Yeah, it's a great question, and every team clearly is managing this differently, and every team is managing at differing levels of success, right? I know this year Seattle's kind of had a bit of a reality check with some of the injury scares that their starters have had, but still, for the most part, you have to give them credit for how durable that staff has been. Whereas, you know who I'm thinking of. There's some teams that have really struggled to keep their pitchers on the field, for better or for worse. But as you mentioned with guys like Cade Anderson, like there's so many different ways that you can handle this, and so a lot of this stuff is impacted by what guys are doing long before they get into pro ball, how many pitches they're throwing in college, how hard they're trying to throw when they're 15 years old. Like all of these things are contributing to kind of the stake that they're in once they get to the major leagues. And then once you get there, I think all these teams are kind of grasping at something that they still don't fully understand. So obviously every team has a different way to go about it. And clearly some franchises have proven a better ability to keep their pitchers on the field than others. I mentioned Seattle, but I mean, Philadelphia is the other one that has been incredible at keeping their starters on the field for the most part over the last few years. So how or why they're able to do that, I don't know. But, at some point you kind of have to look at the teams that do have a million guys in the IL and the ones that don't, and do wonder what they are doing behind the scenes or in their innings management that is contributing to that.
How much pressure is on Jerry to get a deal done at this trade deadline? We had a conversation yesterday, and I told Stacy, I don't think he fears the trade deadline, but he respects the trade deadline and understands, like, okay, something needs to be done. But I also feel like he's in such good standing with ownership for some reason that even if it doesn't work out this year, he's probably going to be fine. Like, how do you see Jerry in his position?
That last part is such a good question. I think coming into the season, it felt like a real hot seat year. And maybe that's still true. We don't really know. But you also might be right that he does feel like he's a little bit more comfortable and isn't necessarily as willing to be aggressive. I think where they are in the standings also speaks to that. I think how injured Houston is, and if they believe they can catch Houston, which based on how 17 people on the injured list, I mean, my goodness, to have that basically an entire starting lineup of hitters on the IL. Not to mention now Lance McCullers going down again. Especially if they still think they could chase down Houston, which because of how depleted they are now, I expect them to add as well. I think you got to try. I think that they still have to act aggressive. We know that they will be active in some form, even in the years where they've shocked the world and dealt Paul Sewald and pissed everybody off. Like they're gonna do something. We know they are too creative and have too many moving parts, and a front office, of course, known for wheeling and dealing. I think they'll find a way to do something. But to your point, how much pressure are they feeling to really go all in and trade some top prospects? That will be really interesting to see. I'm not sure there's really anyone at this deadline that is going to warrant trading a Colt Emerson or a Farmelo or a Las Montez. But that is also where the strength of the farm system comes into play. There are a lot of guys, as we learned last year, Brody Hopkins and Aiden Smith, not in the top 10. Those are good prospects, but you can make a real deal with some of those lower level guys because teams like them. And so that's what's going to be interesting to find out in the next 10 days or so.
Jeff Passan was on with our morning show, Brock and Salk, earlier this week and had really glowing praise of like the potential of the Mariners. Kind of was saying, look, in theory, they could be really, really good, including this year. And Bump had a funny theory about a couple years ago, Jeff kind of insulted Mariners fans, so maybe he's atoning, and maybe he's trying to get into their good graces. But I also think that Jeff is a very honest, blunt person, and I do think that he's high on some of Seattle's potential. I'm curious what you think, because I know that you favor Houston fairly so, understandably so. What's kind of your blunt overview of not just Seattle's potential, but the team that they could feasibly be this year? Like, what's a realistic version of a team they could be this year?
Sure. Again, I think we've seen that in spurts this season in some of the recipes for success. Sometimes the offense is really clicking. Some of these road trips where they're putting up a boatload of runs and you got Randy swinging and Julio. I mean, Detroit, right? What they did in Detroit right before the break was as good as you're going to see the offense kind of humming and clicking on all cylinders. Now, at the same time, I think the thing with them is the same thing that I'll say about anyone that has, plus 50% playoff odds in the American League. And we just did our big trade deadline preview extravaganza on the podcast today. I said this most strongly about the Detroit Tigers, actually, which is I'm not sure the American League is going to be this bad again anytime soon or this wide open. And so if anything, this is really, it's not just about the AL West, which is clearly not as fearsome as it used to be. It's the whole league. And so that should be viewed as an opportunity, a window to push, because, as I said, I do think Seattle's floor is higher than a lot of these other teams. Where their ceiling is, I think that's going to be dictated by a lot of the key players already on the roster and maybe who they go out and get before the deadline.
It's been a while since we asked you this, Jordan. Julio update. We've been kind of focused on Cal and Randy and the rotation. What are you seeing out of 44?
Yeah, 100%. Obviously, what he did in that weekend in Detroit before the break was so encouraging. A little bit uneven since then, but it's just a reminder that it's in there. It's a reminder that when he is turning on the ball, when he is putting the ball in the air, he is still such an impactful hitter. Still being very aggressive. We're still seeing that sometimes be a flawed approach, but for the most part, like it's right there. It's right there for him, and I think that. I mean, what's interesting is, obviously, pitchers know that he's going to chase, so how many pitches is he going to see, really? At the same time, you also know that there's other guys in this lineup that pitchers don't want to deal with, and so maybe he is going to be seeing more pitches that he is going to be able to do damage on. So I'm still pretty optimistic that Julio's in for a big second half. Still haven't seen it totally click quite yet, but I think it's trending in the right direction.
Last one for me, fitting that for Baseball Barbiecast, you did the trade deadline extravaganza, so this will be an easy one. Outside of Seattle, what are some American League teams you anticipate to be pretty aggressive, just so Mariners fans kind of know what they're looking at here?
Yeah, I will say one of the teams that I don't feel like we've talked about a lot on here and even in a deadline context, but I don't really know what to expect, but there's something in me thinks that they're going to be buyers, and that's Texas. Texas is, I just don't think that they're going to do another year removed from the World Series where they just kind of accept that it's not really working. They also have some elite traits, right? A top, maybe still top 1 ERA in baseball. I know it was at one point in the last couple of weeks. They do have some pitching. They still could use some more pitching, especially in the bullpen. The personnel on offense, it's amazing it hasn't produced more runs. I just have an inkling that they're going to find a way to buy. I don't know exactly where it's going to fit. But, man, I mean, the season they're getting from Jacob deGrom, that's another team that you can imagine looking themselves in the mirror and say, if we get in, we can make some noise. They showed that 2 years ago. I don't know if they don't have quite as many pieces to trade the way that Seattle or some of these other deeper farm systems do. But I just have an inkling that Texas is going to try to push. And that would impact and should motivate Seattle to be aggressive as well.
Baseball Barbiecast, the latest there, getting you ready for the trade deadline. Jake Mintz and, of course, Jordan Shusterman joining us every single Wednesday. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, Jordan.
See you guys next week.